I'm going to introduce Warwick Varley. Warwick is an expert in the eucalypts of the Illawarra. It's his business, in fact, and he is going to share with us some of the incredible diversity that we will see in the Eucs over the next few days. He is also the leader of the Eucalyptus Study Group. So please welcome Warwick Varley.
Over 30 years ago, I took myself, as an undergraduate, on a self-taught course on eucalypts. Wasn't quite getting what I needed to know out of the institution I was learning from. And I attended seminars, workshops, and I started building a library on the genus, and even got to the extent that I started building up a capsule and bud collection, which is a really useful resource. And after 2 years, I was in tears. What a bugger of a planter I do. Really. And I'm still working hard at it. My library's really extensive now. And the bud collection takes up a huge filing cabinet in the office. But finally feeling a little more confident where I am. And I really have to in my line of work, because I don't think there's a day goes by where someone in the office or myself hasn't got a Eucalyptus ID, and at least every week we've got a sample bag coming to the office. Let's key this out. Primary issue. There we go. Primary issue with eucalypt identification is variation in species. I know it's a Carimbia, but let's face it, for the best part of its life, it was a eucalypt. And if the lumpers get their way again, then we're all hunky-dory. That dash in the middle there, a lot of these are my own photographs, and you'll notice I'm not a photographer. That dash in the middle there is a scale of 10 millimetres. They're all capsules from, there's 4 different trees there. The first 3 you're seeing, the first ones, which are the smallest, are all from 3 trees, all on the same property. Same bark, varying habits, same leaves, all ficifolia, all red flowering. The last 2 are from a school down in Milton, which I picked up not that long ago. And you can just see the variation, they came from the same tree. And this is just what we see with eucalypts. Just we get different bark types, different leaves. You even look Brooker and Klanick's books, or actually even Euclid, and you look at the size of a leaf, it's 10 to 25 centimetres. Well, what is it? And this is one of the issues I get with eucalypts. And look, I wasn't going to go into taxonomy today. I wasn't going to bore you with that. I didn't want to bring you to tears. I just thought I'd do a brief overview on the landscape of the Illawarra to start with, just to give you a bit of an understanding why we've got such a variation of species in the area, because we have really a large group of different eucalypts compared to most areas for the same geographical area. But look, one of the examples I had a few years ago, where I've always been preaching for some years, because I learned from other colleagues that the Illawarra has all white flowering eucalypts, probably a few variations of cream in there. And a colleague showed me, I think there's a small population of Eucalyptus paniculata, which is our grey iron bark, and it's the only iron bark we have in the Illawarra. And there's a pale pink one. And I thought, and you kind of reflect back, how many people have I told that to now? I'm now at the chain repertoire. So look, I wasn't going to go down the avenue of ideas. I thought I'd start off with a small spiel about the landscape of the Illawarra. And I've actually selected about half a dozen common eucalypts we see throughout the Illawarra, and just picked out a few little interesting characteristics about them. The Illawarra. Now, can you see that yellow line there? Yeah. Can you see that up the back, the marker? That yellow line there generally represents the ridge top running along between the plateau and the coastal plain. So what we've got here is we've got along here we've got the beachfront, which is made up of your hind dunes, your sand dunes, and your lagoons. And then we've got the plateau, the coastal plateau, which is a large accumulation of deep alluvial soils which have all been washed down from the escarpment and the plateau, and that absolute labyrinth of waterways. It's really quite phenomenal the amount of riparian zones we have through the area. And of course the plateau the escarpment is basically the slope which extends up to the plateau. And the escarpment's made up of benches, gullies, foothills, spurs. It's quite an undulating landscape, realistically, even though it just looks like a nice consistent slope up to the plateau. We've got this huge number of little microclimates which start establishing themselves in these areas. So if you actually stand down on the beachfront along Bulli, Woonona, along here, you can actually look up the plateau and you really look at it, you can actually start seeing these variations in the colour green throughout it. So what we've actually got there is we've got these large lines running down the escarpment which are dark green. That's the rainforest sitting down in the gully. And as you move probably 100 metres one way or the other, it turns into a more of a green, khaki green. And of course, you're actually moving up into a spur of where the eucalypt is. There's a wet or dry sclerophyll, and it moves back down again in the rainforest. So if you're looking back from the beachfront, you can actually see these changes in colour green, which all these different vegetation types running through the area. And of course, coupled with that, then we've got at least 6 or 8 different soil types running throughout the entire area. And of course, what dictates your tree species and even plant species is your soil type is one of the most largest contributors to the different species you have growing in an area. And for this reason, we've got quite a number. I mean, for instance, we've got over 160 species of trees throughout the Illawarra. 92 of those are rainforest species. And of course, then we move on to the eucalypts. Of course, actually, just that slide there just points out the altitude difference from sea level to the top of the escarpment is around the 400 metre mark. And you've got changes in your soil types and exposure. But I actually selected a collection of resources there. Just on the different resources which refer to a number of tree species. So Leon Kostelman refers to about 20 species. Leon Fuller, in his latest edition, his third edition, refers to 20 of trees of the Illawarra, refers to 22 species of eucalypt. Klepacki, in his trees of eucalypts of the Sydney region, refers to 26 species, I think it is. An earlier edition by Leon Fuller and Kevin Mills refers to 31 species. And then we get blown right out by Chippendale and Wolf, which is a Commonwealth publication, eucalypt distribution throughout Australia, which refers to 81 species. And realistically, the difference between all these is going to come down to how you would define the boundaries of the Illawarra. I have no doubt the last resource probably took it out past Picton or somewhere like that. And of course, and potentially also lumpers and splitters. Because I think we've had probably at least, if we use this example of the scribbly gums, which I think we've had about 4 or 5 of them, and I think they're being whittled down to 2 at the moment. So just a change in taxonomy alone is going to make a difference in the number. I was talking to Leon just some time ago, and we've basically, he made a call that he believes it's probably around 28, possibly up to 30 species of eucalypts within the Illawarra, if we wanted to find the boundaries to run from approximately Otford down to Berry and to the escarpment crest. That's it. What I thought we'd do is I was going to start off with talking about a collection of these eucalypts, and the first one I want to talk about was, and actually the way I've arranged them is I was just starting with the species closest to the ocean and working my way back up the escarpment. First one, Eucalyptus robusta, is swamp mahogany. As the specific epithet suggests, robust, and robust in nature of its characteristics. It's got a it's rough bark to the ends of the branches. It's got a very deep fissured red bark, soft red bark to it. It's got a large barrel-shaped capsule, large bud with a pointy operculum, and a very reasonably large, for a eucalypt, large broad ovate leaf. This species is one of your water-loving species. It's not unusual to see it growing submerged underwater, the base of the tree submerged underwater at high tide. You'll generally always find it within areas or very close to salt water. It is a reasonably tolerant tree for those reasons, but it's always along the coastal fringe. And if we look at this area back here, this is Lake Illawarra just here, and this is all the flood zone behind Lake Illawarra. So it's all very low, boggy area where you're going to see the species as well, and of course all along the coastal fringe. interesting component of this tree is adventitious roots. You don't see this very often in eucalypts. This is the tree on the left is just behind. Sorry, tree on the right is just behind Kyma Cemetery, behind Bombo there, and on the left is in Otford. And I tend to believe that this. I've been looking at this for some years, but it rather intrigued me to see aerial roots on eucalypts. I've got quite a photographic inventory on it, but what I've been noticing is that trees in higher rainfall seem to produce more adventitious roots. And this is an example of some years ago I was trekking up in the northern rainforests of Madagascar, and I came across a plantation of Eucalyptus robusta. These are about 30-metre high trees, and they'd actually been planted by the French Foreign Legion back in the 1930s for the purpose of building railways, which never came to fruition. They got abandoned, like another plantation I found down on the east coast, and fortunately the rainforest took over, which they bulldozed. Which is nice to see, because most of these places we see, it doesn't come back. But what we see there is just these huge rows of Eucalyptus robusta just shrouded in aerial roots. I'm going to move on to Eucalyptus botryoides and Bangalate. Closely related to, it's one of the mahogany group, closely related to your robusta. It grows just behind them as well, as in it's a water-loving species. You'll commonly find, actually it's rare to find this tree much further than about 100-150 metres back from the high water mark. It generally grows in the hind dunes. This particular spot here, that's heading down just from Bald Hill, Sandwell Park, just heading downhill from Bald Hill, and we have quite a large, reasonable sized forest there of botryoides. And if you have a look, actually for those orchid enthusiasts just there, we've got a lovely big clump of Cymbidium suave growing out of the cavity. And of course this particular species is got quite a low durability rating and really susceptible to termites and pathogenic decay. So it's not unusual to find them to be blocks of uniform arboreal species, arboreal fauna, which is great out in the forest. It's just not the most ideal planting in the urban environment. It's similar to robusta, other than the fact that most of the features on it are just that little bit less. It's got slightly smaller capsules. It's got actually a sessile capsule. Where did that go on? Sessile, and we've got the flattened peduncles like most of your mahogany group does, which is one of its identifying features. Not to say I'm sure there's other flattened peduncles out there which don't belong to the mahogany group, but we got an ovate leaf again, and they got bark to about 3/4 of the way up. But they're one of those trees which are fairly decurrent, broad-sprawled, and rather contorted-looking specimens. You can see its range is in the same position as robusta, and the unfortunate part about what we see there is that a lot of that is all along the coastal fringe, and of course waterfront real estate being at the premium as it is and being filled up with concrete, we've lost a lot of these trees in their remnant stages. So where we see them is maybe places behind in Pucky's estate, behind Primby, small reserves which have been retained. This is on the foreshore of Jervis Bay. And you can see this one here is just sitting just there on the high water mark. It's had a lot of its root system exposed just from high tide. Still standing even though it's had a huge amount of root system exposed, and one of the reasons for this is if you have a look at the root system on them, they have all the laterals which you normally see, because your soil level will be normally sitting about here, but they've got this large taproot which extends down, and you get another large tier of roots extending off this. Now this is part of the inherent nature of this particular species, and a collection of other eucalypts which have this particular type of root system, which is great for stability, and there seems to be a bit of a correlation there with this type of root system and those trees which grow down close to the waterfront. I've seen these trees in the urban environment have significant roots cut off, large roots, 2 to 3 in diameter, and they don't go anywhere. Normally you'd want to see a tree like that fall over, particularly if there's one of the conifers, and I'm going to give you Eucalyptus and Cameocypris, have reasonably shallow root systems, and if you did that with one of those, the tree would be over within a few weeks. These trees here, they've actually got this, because of this large second tier of roots, they retain themselves still, and potentially adaptation for the location they're growing. And it also counts for aerial roots. Not as much as robusta, But one of the intriguing features I find about the aerial roots on both Robusta and Botrytis is, and when you do some searches on this, there's very little information. There hasn't been any research conducted or any papers written on it. I've started writing one up. I might get it up there one day. But it's also located in two other species, and that's Eucalyptus canaldulensis, as you probably know, as I think it's river red gum. It's got one of the widest distributions of any eucalypt in Australia, but it's always located in watercourses. And of course, the other species is Eucalyptus diglupta, which is endemic to New Guinea, and it's a rainforest species. I think it's probably one of the only rainforest species I'm aware of. It actually has chlorophyll through the stem, that tree, but again, it's a water-loving tree. So we've got this strong correlation there of tree eucalypts, a few of them, which produce aerial roots, which are all water-loving trees, which then beckons the question, is this an adaptation in the making or a past adaptation? Either way, aerial roots are always going to be a benefit to a tree. I think we're moving on to the next. Eucalyptus saligna cross Botrytis. This is our local occurring hybrid. And look, eucalypts are reasonably renowned for hybridising, but there's not a huge number of them which are actually listed in any of the books, and this is one of them. A bit of a contentious one, an absolute bugger of ID because it does look very similar to the blackbutt, Eucalyptus pilaris, and the biggest issue with it is it caters for, each tree seems to be more weighted towards either one of its parents. So we'll get some trees which have just got a very small bark collar at the bottom, large tall shafts of blue smooth bark, and they look virtually like their parents being Eucalyptus saligna. Then you can go to the other extreme again of those which are virtually all rough bark over them. And even though they're natural occurring hybrid, they look very much like the Bangladesh. The interesting component is that Eucalyptus Botrytis occurs naturally from Newcastle down to Victoria along the coast. Eucalyptus saligna starts around just on Sydney Harbour and works its way up the coast. Eucalyptus saligna cross Botrytis starts at Sydney Harbour and goes down the coast. Interestingly, we're so often getting these reports of, we've seen a group of Eucalyptus saligna down the coast, and the question is it really? Because it's always been that niggling question made is, does it actually occur in natural populations down here? And I've been looking for it now for over 20 years, just following up on on calls people make where they think it exists. In fact, there's a population at the back of Illawarra, which for the life of it looks like you're in a Sydney blue gum forest. But effectively, I understand they've been confirmed to be otherwise. And I think one of the few features we've got to be able to do that is the stomates and where the stomates are located, because the stomates on the Bangladesh is located on the top, upper and lower surface, but on the saligna it's only located on the lower surface. It's got quite a large area of distribution, as you can see. Extends not far from behind the beach up into the escarpment. One of the things we are seeing, because Eucalyptus pilaris used to be one of the, what I consider, well, it actually is registered as the most prolific species in the Illawarra. But I think this one could have been starting to take over purely for the sake of human intervention, because we're seeing development take out large areas of remnant bush, and because it's a pioneering species, so when we see an area being cleared for development and subdivision, what we see popping all back up again is this species along with acacia. This is registered as the largest Eucalyptus saligna in Australia. The thing about photographing big trees is you kind of need a person near it so you can actually see it's a big tree. Otherwise, it just looks like another tree in the forest. And then if you want to get a photograph of the whole tree, by the time we got far enough back, you've lost the tree. Sorry, that was that's in Foxground. That's in Foxground is just behind Gerringong. Just behind Gerringong. You'll find these listed on the National Register of Big Trees. Tree age is always one of those things that comes up. Eucalypts, I've seen them listed anything up to, there's supposed to be some globulus down in South Australia, which are around 3,000 years, they say. As a general rule, I refer to eucalypts as about 400 years, 400 to 500 years. I've seen reports of certain species running up to 600 and 800 years in the urban environment, which is half the natural age straight away. If you use 400 years as a general rule of thumb for a eucalypt, I think you're getting reasonably close. The Yeah, that's without taking dendrological cause out of it, you can't be certain. Unfortunately, by the time a tree gets to this age, they've got large hollows running through them, which kind of defeats the purpose of trying to take the core through it to count the rings. Eucalyptus pillaris, your black butt. This has a collar of bark on the base of it. It's predominantly smooth bark. It is one of the most, I said, it's the most common species you'll see throughout the Illawarra. It extends, and it's, I said, it's very close to Eucalyptus saligna crossbotryoides, but the capsules are these large globose, and they do fruit prolifically. So you generally look on the ground around the base of the tree, and that's where you're going to find the capsules. That's one of the big things, because it must look strange sometimes, because so often I'm on all fours just crawling around the base of the tree looking for capsules. So you can see the range of it here. It's quite prolific along all the coastal plain, and when we get to Mount Kira there, just there, it is from this, runs straight up the escarpment all the way up to Stanwell Park. And because this tree likes its warmth, so as we move further south, it becomes far closer to the coast, and you'll see this tree growing right up to the edge of the sand where the ocean is. And as you move further north, it actually works its way out further west and up into the Blue Mountains, and up from there, extends up to there. I think it extends up to, extends New South Wales and Queensland, it extends to. And this is the other section of the road I showed you earlier where we had Eucalyptus botryoides at the top of it. And of course, we move further on down that road, and it's almost like this direct line, delineated line, where it moves straight from botryoides straight into Eucalyptus pillaris. And these ones are at the top of the road, and they're about 15, 20 metre high trees, reasonably decurrent, but as you move down towards the bottom of the tree, of the road, you come across these large 30 metre high forest glass, pillaris. And there we have, I think it's the second or third largest black butt in Australia, which when we say the biggest in Australia, I think you'd actually comfortably say the biggest in the world. This is the Greenfields National Park beach down in Vincentia. This is a beautiful place to go and have a look at. The beach, by the way, is about 50 metres there, just off to the left. And this tree here is, so it's got 48 metres high there. I think I measured that about 8 or 10 years ago, but we do an aerial, I do an aerial assessment on this probably every 2 or 3 years with national parks, and that's the one thing that really makes you feel old. It's an outstanding specimen, but it's about 2 metres stem diameter at the base. And of course, most of the trees in this car park, I don't think there's any trees in this car park less than about 30 metres high. And this is a stump of one. Again, this has been pulled out by a bulldozer down on the beach at Manana. And of course, what we're looking at there is, that's about 500 in diameter there. So it's not a large tree, but you can see here's your lateral roots, and you've got this large carrot here, which is like basically is a taproot. It's actually what's formed out of the radical from your seedling, and it's got this second tier of roots running around it, and it's got a third tier of roots running around it down here. So you get a bit of an understanding of the stability these trees have in the soil. So it's only a young tree at the moment, 500 in diameter. I'd probably say it's about a 30, 40-year-old tree, but when you allow for its lifespan of 150, 200 years plus, that carrot certainly may not extend a great deal longer, but what will happen is those lateral roots are going to extend out. So you've got 3 large tiers of roots extending out underneath it, and they truly anchor that tree into the ground well. Eucalyptus pterodocornis, forest red gum. Complete smooth bark tree, unique, I would say not necessarily unique, but it's got these operculums, horn-shaped operculums, which other than, we got Eucalyptus amplifolia in the Illawarra as well, which looks really similar to it, and they grow in the same environment, same place, except for amplifolia prefers to have more boggier grounds. And of course, again, really difficult to tell apart. There's a collection of little things you can use, but of course with variation, you can't be certain of what necessarily it always is. You can see its range just there. And of course, one of the interesting components of this tree is the range of this tree nationally is it extends completely east of the Great Dividing Range from Victoria to Cape York and extends up into New Guinea. And of course, what we so often find with any species which has a large distribution is that then you get subspecies being divided up. And this tree has 4 subspecies in it. I think this one's Pterodocornis subspecies Pterodocornis. And of course, with the variation, and this is down Culburra Beach, and this is interesting from what I'm going to be talking about the species in the next couple of slides, because It's a bit hard to see in the photographs there, but the tree on the left actually has very pendulous foliage, almost like a weeping willow, while the one on the right has very erect foliage, which is what you typically see in the species. In this particular area, which had, must have been about 15 or 20 pteranodons through it, had a reasonably equal combination of those which are very pendulous as opposed to those which have completely erect foliage. It's just quite surprising, the variation there from one small area. But this leads on to this component here, Eucalyptus canaldulensis, because what we've got here is a map of Australia showing the distribution of Eucalyptus canaldulensis and its 7 subspecies. Each one is coloured and extends, and the distribution of Eucalyptus canaldulensis is considered over the best part of Australia and exists everywhere west of the Great Dividing Range, while Eucalyptus terracornis exists everywhere east of the Great Dividing Range. The interesting component is if we got this little area up here, we got this little subspecies of Eucalyptus canaldulensis subspecies simulata, and it is absolutely identical to terracornis except the seed colour and the juvenile leaf is slightly broader. And I suppose what I'm getting to about this in the end is canaldulensis initially started at the very top, and it's moved its way across Australia and the subspecies have formed out of that. So effectively we could be looking at terracornis as being, and canaldulensis as possibly having the common parents, or maybe it's a distant hybrid or cultivar of canaldulensis. Either way, what I find intriguing about it is we're dealing with about 850 species of eucalypt, and yet we've got particularly 2 of them which cover virtually the entire mainland Australia. And we've got a common missing link up there, simulata, which is making a suggestion that they're related in the end after all. And who knows, maybe the whumpers will get their way. I've got other species here I can talk about here, but I believe my time's up.
If you enjoyed this presentation, then please subscribe to our channel. Other presentations from the conference are available in this playlist, with new ones being added all the time.